The Manson family is one of the most infamous family/cults to ever plague the earth in the late 60s, early 70s. Led by a madman who was bent on controlling others and influencing them to murder for him, the family's reign of terror would end in a series of trials to determine who was to blame. Today, we'll take a look at one of the Manson family's attorneys and his own strange demise that is still unsolved today. Let's talk about what happened to Ronald Hughes. The Manson family's crimes have been covered to death, no pun intended, since the 60s in books, movies, news articles, YouTube channels, and much, much more. It's a nightmare of a case that has been discussed into the ground like many other famous serial killers, so I'm not going to focus on that today. What I will talk about is the less-known death that was connected to the Manson murders that less people know about. Ronald Hughes was one of the first lawyers to meet with Charles Manson in December of 1969. Nice. He was known as the hippie lawyer because of his extensive knowledge on the hippie movement in Southern California. While he failed the bar exam 3 times, he eventually passed, and what a doozy of a case he was to take on. Originally, he was supposed to represent all 4 Manson family members involved in the murders, including Leslie Von Hulten, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Charles Manson himself. However, after spending some time with the case, he narrowed his focus down to representing Leslie, and overall wanting to convince the jury that the girls were under Manson's influence the whole time, therefore making their sentence less harsh and making sure that Charles was put away. This, of course, didn't bode well with Charles, as he wanted to separate himself from the murders as much as he could and throw his so-called family to the wolves while he ran free. He had a plan securely in place that Hughes was throwing a wrench into. For 22 weeks into the trial, all 3 women stood up shouting that they wanted to protest as per Manson's brainwashing, and claim that the murders were all their doing with no influence from Charles. Hughes objected and pushed back against Manson's plan, stating, "I refuse to take part in any proceedings where I am forced to push a client out the window." He was trying to help these girls, even if their powerful leader still had a solid hold on them. After the outburst, the judge allowed a 10-day recess so lawyers could prepare their final arguments. Hughes was confident that he could get an acquittal for Leslie. During the break, Ronald went on a camping trip to the Sespe Hot Springs in Ventura County, California on November 27, 1970. Not the best time to go, as according to his 2 camping companions, James Foster and Lauren Elder, there were heavy rains that were causing flash floods in the area. The storm had rendered their Volkswagen useless in the mud, so James and Lauren had to hitchhike their way out, while Ronald, for whatever reason, chose to stay behind until the 29th. The last time Hughes was seen was the morning of the 28th, when he passed by and said hello to 3 other hikers. When interviewed, they said he seemed unharmed and in an area that was away from the floods. Seemed like the lawyer had avoided catastrophe, except he didn't. Hughes failed to appear in court when it returned, but due to the intense rainstorms in the area, police had to hold off a search for 2 days. On December 2nd, the judge had to keep the trial going, so he assigned a new lawyer to take Hughes' place. But now we had a missing person on our hands. In March of 1971, roughly 3 months after Hughes' disappearance, police received an anonymous tip that sent them back out searching. It took weeks, but finally, while searching the area surrounding Baker's Ranch in Inyo County, suspiciously the area where the Manson family formerly lived, Hughes' body was discovered. Hughes was badly decomposed, naked, partially eaten, missing his right arm, wedged between two rocks, and barely recognizable. Sheriff County Charles Rudd investigated the death and ruled that it had been no foul play, and that Hughes had simply gotten trapped in the floods, killed in the weather, and eaten by a passing wildlife. On the other end of the explanations, Manson family member Lynette Fromm stated that Hughes was murdered in retaliation for betraying Charles. It was enough to cause suspicion and rule his death as undetermined. Being connected to the murders of a madman and giving him reason to strike out against an attempt to put him in prison. It's possible that Ronald Hughes had just fallen unconscious and became a victim of the elements. But the bad timing of it all will forever have people wondering if there was something more planned about his death. It's a smaller story that has the idea perpetuating that everybody connected to these murders was doomed. But let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. For more true crime and horror, please consider subscribing. Game with me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter, and as always, be well.